Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hello from Bedford. How are you all? Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, which is brought to you by the Mighty Kraken, the best place to buy, sell, and trade Bitcoin. I'm your host, Peter McCormack, and today I've got an interview with the editor of Bloomberg News, Joe Weisenthal, looking at contradictory Bitcoin ideals and questioning if an ETF represents Bitcoin selling out. But before that, I do have a message from my show sponsors, and make sure you check them out, because it's the sponsors that allow me to travel all over the place and get these amazing interviews. So first up, we have the backbone of Bitcoin, Wire. Have you checked them out yet? No? Why the fuck not? Why have you not checked out Wire yet? They've been sponsoring the show now for over a month. Big thanks to them for becoming part of this. Wire are helping companies across the space offer Bitcoin onboarding. So whether you are a solo developer or a large team, if you are looking to simplify user onboarding and offer your users a fast and easy way to purchase Bitcoin, then you really need to talk to Wire. Since 2013, Wire focused on taking care of all the heavy lifting in terms of compliance, payments, and liquidity, so you can focus on building your core offering. Your idea could be the next killer app, so do not let the regulators kill it. To find out more, reach out to Wire or create a developer account at sendwire.com, which is SENDWYRE.com. Next up, we have Dropbit, the most badass wallet in Bitcoin. You know I love these guys, right? And I'm going to be catching up with them next week. Can't wait for that. And I'm working on convincing them to get me a Dropbit Lambo. So I'm going to be trying to twist their arm when I meet up with them next week. But have you downloaded the app yet? I know thousands of you have. And I've been unlocking your Lightning Wallet spare. But if you haven't, why not? Why have you not checked out Dropbit yet? Let me tell you what they've been up to. They now support Lightning. They've also added support for Betch32 addresses. With Dropbit, you can text Bitcoin and you can tweet Bitcoin. And now you can buy Bitcoin in the app. Using Apple Pay and Google Pay, all powered by Wire, you can now purchase Bitcoin directly into Dropbit. They are crushing it. So make sure you check out Dropbit. It is available for the iPhone and Android. Just head over to dropbit.app, which is DROPBIT.app. And finally, it is time to start prepping for Consensus when everyone descends on New York to talk Bitcoin. As ever, I'll be there. I'll probably be hosting a party, and I've also negotiated a special early bird offer if you want to attend Consensus. It is the anchor of Blockchain Week. Consensus brings together the who's who of the crypto community, and it's always great to get into town and catch up with you Bitcoin heads. They always manage to bag great speakers. Previously, they've had presidential candidate Andrew Yang, SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, who you know I adore, and the CEO and co-founder of Coinbase, Brian Armstrong. The list goes on and on. You can register now at the lowest price they will have all year. It is $999, and this price will expire on the 13th of December at midnight. You just need to use the code WhatBitcoinDid, and also the first 50 people to register with the code will receive a limited edition swag bag. To find out more, head over to consensus2020.com, which is CONSENSUS 2020.com. All right, so onto the show, and it's one I'm quite excited to have because I was on his podcast previously talking about what a moron I was, losing loads of money trading Bitcoin like an idiot. So today I'm joined by the editor of business news at Bloomberg, Joe Weisenthal. And so for those of you who aren't aware of Joe, he caused a bit of a stir on Twitter recently by raising the arguably contradictory nature of a Bitcoin ETF. Now, there were some pretty shitty responses to it, but there were also some pretty level-headed ones, those who understood the point Joe was making. And I think it's ridiculous to try and keep these conversations quiet. I think we should encourage people to raise unpopular opinions. It's something I often do on Twitter, and I get a lot of shit for it, but usually it kind of finds its way of making a relevant debate. Sometimes I get it right, sometimes I got it wrong. I think Joe got it right here. So it's a really interesting chat. I really like Joe's perspective, and we get into the kind of hypocritical nature of Bitcoiners sometimes, raising off-limit topics, ETFs, how censorship resistance is a Bitcoin killer application, and how Joe sees the current state of the economy. So I hope you enjoy this. You know, if you've got any feedback, you can hit me up. And just a note, I am back off to the States on Wednesday, just working out my final plans. In the list, I've got Boston, New York, San Francisco, Ohio, Indianapolis, LA, Hawaii, Texas, and Washington. I don't know if I'll hit all of them, but I'm going to hit as many cities as I can, as I've got some amazing interviews planned up. Hopefully, when I know the schedule, I can organise meeting up with some of you. Sadly, I'm not going to be heading out to New Zealand on this trip. That one's going to be postponed, probably till the new year now, just too much on. Anyway, if you've got any questions, you know you can hit me up. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. Good morning, Joe. How you doing?
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
No problem. No problem. So you've been pissing off the Bitcoiners?
I don't know why. I have been. They've been really angry with me, but they've always been angry with me, and I can never figure out exactly what it is that I do to bother them so much, but they seem to get annoyed.
Because you're an idiot Bitcoin hater.
That's right, because I work for the man, and so obviously I'm a Bitcoin hater, and I'm trying to destroy them because I love the Fed and QE, and I want them to all submit.
And you ask questions.
Well, I try to be provocative. I try to poke holes. I don't know why that's hate, but that's all right.
I do the same. I get shit all the time.
I know you do.
I've had it this week. You know, I think it's good to poke holes. I think it's good to challenge.
Yeah.
Like it's Bitcoin, right? If we can break it by poking holes on Twitter, it's fucked.
Yes, that's a really good point. Like if you're worried about a tweet, or if you're worried that I'm going to raise some question about the whether a Bitcoin ETF, say, makes sense, if that's a big problem or if that's a concern, then perhaps there are deeper problems that are being left unspoken about.
I actually thought the thing you were saying about anonymity was, you actually made a really good fucking point.
Thank you.
And I know I'm not the only one. I know Nick Carter also thought you made a good point. I think we'll get into that.
I love Nick, yeah.
He's
He's one of the few people that ever sticks up for me.
Yeah, because he also will challenge at times.
Yeah.
He will put out things that challenge people and challenge their thinking. And I think too often people just get very defensive. It's like, why are you attacking? Why are you doing this? Why are you questioning this? And my big issue with most of them, I did a tweet this morning just saying there's a huge gulf in understanding between Bitcoiners and non-Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
And they just expect everyone to suddenly understand things. Like my biggest gripe at the moment is that this expectation that like once a mother has gone into labor and had a baby, that baby will come into the world as a maximalist and instantly understand why Bitcoin is king and everything else is a scam.
Well, the funny thing to me is I would also flip it around, which is Bitcoiners look at people, especially those of us who are in sort of legacy, traditional media, they say, like, oh, you don't understand anything about Bitcoin, and you spread all this FUD, and you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's not entirely wrong all the time, but, you know, ask a Bitcoiner about, like, how the repo market works. They never feel uncomfortable opining about the Fed or the repo market or how sort of interbank transfers work. And have they really put in the work to understand that, or are they just going based on some 5-minute worth of research, if that? So,
Yep.
you know, there might be a little bit of introspection. I get the criticism. Like, I do find it frustrating because I'm interested in Bitcoin, and I see people making criticisms of it that I regard as off the mark. And there's a lot of discussion that's like, oh, this is really uninformed, or this issue I thought was like settled in 2013, and the fact that you're just coming around to it now, like I think sort of demonstrates like certain lack of intellectual curiosity. So I get the frustration, but on the other hand, there is so much nonsense among Bitcoiners about non-Bitcoin things that maybe they should just have a little more sort of self-awareness when they criticize others for not getting it.
Yeah, okay. You're going into a world where I've struggled with some people in the non-Bitcoin topics, but it's almost like Bitcoin's become so political that a lot of Bitcoiners align around similar kind of views on certain subjects, whether it's global warming, gun rights, blah, blah, blah. But I also feel like there's just this lack of compassion and understanding for people coming in. So, and I get it, like, right, okay, so they've had 3 years of debating block size, and people are tired of having it. Right. But Bitcoin is still very small.
Yeah.
If somebody discovers cryptocurrencies this week and they come in and they're going to see Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV, and it's like, well, what's the difference? And it's like, well, one's on chain, one's off chain. So at that moment, they still have to decipher what it all means.
Right. It would be virtually impossible for someone just coming in to have an intuitive understanding of the differences and to realize that a cryptocurrency, and this is, I think, a really tough one, but that a cryptocurrency is more than just the sum total of its technical specifications. So that even if you were to make an argument that, say, a larger block size made sense, that wouldn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin SV is the superior project. And that, I think, is a really hard thing to understand because we come from a world, I think, in technology, or most people apply this sort of traditional technological lens to understanding things, where you hold up two things. You hold up an iPhone, and you hold up an Android phone, and you're like, which is the better one? Well, which one is the better camera? Which one is the better battery life? Which one has the better audio quality? Which one lets you do this? And then you check a bunch of pluses and minuses, and whichever one is the best is the better one.
Yep.
And I don't think that that frame works for the cryptocurrency world in the same way, or at least that the specifications upon which you would use to judge them are what we think they are.
Yeah.
And so you might theoretically have a chain in which, from some technical explanation, it's like, oh, this is the better one. But only through a sort of deeper understanding and sort of watching the space for a long time do the limitations start to emerge.
Well, I think it's very easy for someone to be sold on any cryptocurrency once they hear the arguments from someone who's passionate about it.
Yeah, that's a
So
good
I
point.
think it's very easy to be sucked into Bitcoin and understand the, the goals and the objectives that people have for Bitcoin. Whether it's censorship-resistant money or whether it's separated money and state, those ideological goals I think are amazing. At the same time, when somebody tries to sell you an on-chain scaling solution, they said, well, the problem is if you look at the block size, it fills up, and on-chain fees went to $50. You don't want that, do you? We can do 3-cent fees. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
You can see how somebody's sold in it.
Absolutely.
And it takes time. I mean, I know now that all on-chain scaling solutions are fucking nonsense. I've spoke to the computer scientists, but it's taken it took me a year to 2 years.
Well, there was another thing. I completely agree, and I think obviously those of us who were paying attention in summer 2017 during that whole battle over the block size and SegWit2x and so forth, realized too that block size aside, that the whole Bitcoin project, I believe, would probably have ended had the side of the miners and the exchanges won. Because it would essentially have disproven the entire premise of the project, which is that it couldn't be co-opted by large businesses. So even if you could have made the argument that on-chain scaling was superior and that it made a lot of sense for all kinds of reasons for the block size to go up, even if you could have made that argument and convinced people, it still would have been problematic, because had that side won, you would have said, well, that really just blows up the entire argument about decentralization. And in the end, it means it's a doomed project.
But what a great test.
It was a great test.
Yeah,
but I also think everyone who paid attention to that got an incredible education.
But I look at that as just part of the Bitcoin's immune system. It's just going to make it stronger, and all these things will make it stronger. But I don't agree with all Bitcoiners. I don't. And I actually, most of the time when I see them being difficult, I want to challenge, I want to poke at them, I want to find the holes, because I care more about the kind of people who don't understand Bitcoin, who want to get into it, who want to understand it. I don't really care about the hardcore Bitcoiners who've been here for 10 years, who've got thousands of Bitcoin, who are who've lived through every single... I was out last night with a bunch of them, and they were explaining a bug that's coming in the future. Yeah. They're all technical experts. They're explaining this bug that's going to be coming in 2036 or something to do with a hard fork. And I couldn't get my head around it. Yeah. And all 6 of them were explaining it to me, and I just couldn't. I had to give up. And I was like, why am I even trying to understand this? I don't understand how my iPhone works. Right. I don't care. Right. And I think 99.9% of people won't care in this hyper Bitcoinization world they talk about. I just don't think people care. Yeah, and I think it's the kind of thing where you would need for the project to work, and it's, as you say, it's small and it's young and it's unproven, and as much as they'd like to say that it's a done deal, that it's going to be the end all and be all of money, it's still, the honest ones will say that, look, this is experimental technology in its very earliest stages, and it's good that there are some people that are insanely zealous about it, both from a technical standpoint, I guess, and obviously it's crucial that you have so many people who are zealous about evangelizing it. All right, so I just want to dig back a bit before we get into some of the things you did, because I think it's helpful for people to understand, Joe, your background, your pre-Bitcoin world. You're not a Bitcoiner, you're a markets guy. I'm interested in financial markets of all sorts. And has that been your career ever since you left college, university? Pretty much. I sort of dabbled around a few different things. I'd always been interested in financial markets, actually, since high school, because my senior year was when the dot-com bubble really started going. So it just became fascinating to me, learning about how the markets worked. And I got interested, and I had a friend whose family had a small portfolio management company that I did a little work for. So
I just got very interested in financial markets, but I didn't study them in college or anything like that. I studied political science and international relations. Didn't know what I wanted to do, and just through a series of, I got into blogging like a bunch of people, like in 2004, 2005 or so, and then that led to some writing jobs, and I eventually combined my interest in journalism and blogging and markets together, and now I'm at Bloomberg covering all of them. So crypto is part of that. I think it's really fascinating. I was kind of like everyone else, or I was like super dismissive of it first. I was like, oh, this is complete nonsense, or this is just a pure bubble. And I've since become more open-minded, I would say, but still a critic.
Okay, so that's quite interesting because you're obviously mixing with a bunch of people who, from traditional markets, kind of. What is it that the Bitcoiners don't understand about how other people look at their world?
It's a really interesting question. But here's what I would say, and it's like that. And it goes back to what I was saying about, Bitcoiners complain that other people don't get Bitcoin, but people who are into Bitcoin don't get a lot about how the actual financial world works, particularly things like the Federal Reserve or taxation and things like that. And so, if you make a case for Bitcoin to someone in the legacy financial world, and you start going on about how the banking system is in crisis because the Fed had to make this adjustment in repo rates, or with the repo system from a few weeks ago. And then someone who actually understands it would look at you like, well, this person is an idiot. And then furthermore, not only is this person an idiot, but then obviously Bitcoin must be flawed, because if the whole premise of Bitcoin is that it's like somehow going to solve banking or solve some made up problem in banking, then, well, the whole thing is silly. And so I think there is this sort of like a certain like the mantras and the arguments that Bitcoiners make are effective in a certain sense of like building up this community and sort of creating this meme of inevitability, and I get that that's part of it. But on the other hand, people who actually know their stuff look at it as like, well, these people have no idea what they're talking about, so the thing that they're evangelizing must be stupid too.
Right, okay, because I try not to attach myself too strictly to any particular subject, because I want to move around like water. I want to understand everything I can to be as objective as possible, because it's not that important to me.
Right.
So I follow some of the things that Bitcoiners say. So, for example, a lot of them talk about Austrian economics.
Right.
Okay. Which is obviously very closely tied to libertarianism.
Yeah.
And then I spoke to the libertarians who are very much into free markets and deregulated markets and no government, et cetera, et cetera. I struggle to see. I love the idea.
Yeah.
I struggle to see it working practically.
Right. I mean, so here's what my like bigger picture view on all these things, and this is where I tend to. These are like areas where I tend to get into a lot of fights.
Cool.
Which is that Bitcoiners, and I'm sure if they were being honest, a lot of them would agree with what I'm about to say. Bitcoiners, gold bugs, libertarians, diehard advocates of Austrian economics, a lot of them tend to be misanthropes. A lot of them tend to be a lot of them tend to be angry. A lot of them tend to sort of like resent the certain like normal societal order that people accept. And I'm not saying that they're wrong or right. I'm not even making a judgment here. But from a sort of like pure, like actually like strip away ideology, strip away belief, just sort of like introspection in terms of like one's personality, like the sort of like core makeup.
Yeah.
There is a thing there. There is a sort of like a consistent misanthropic thread that feeds across. And I think this is really important, and it's a good and bad thing actually, because the bad aspect of it is like pretty obvious. It can be extremely alienating. People like, it repels people, obviously. But there's a good thing about it, which is that people who reject or don't have the inclination to fit in, or the need to fit in, I believe will be among the first to discover a new thing. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing. So if you don't have, if something in your genetics, and I use the term genetics loosely, if something in your internal makeup does not compel you to like fit in and to sort of like adopt the dominant ideology, adopt the dominant approach to social communication, there is actually a reasonable chance that you will be among the first to come across some like completely new idea. Because if you had that gene, if you felt that need to like always fit in and accept the status quo, then you wouldn't have been out there looking for some new thing in the first place.
I think that's a fair observation.
So I think it's like this sort of like paradox where a new thing will necessarily attract some of like the least pleasant people in the world. Not all of them are unpleasant, but the new thing which then creates the effect of both repelling people, but also they're onto something new that no one else had seen. And I think that's kind of like the framework that I apply to a lot of these things.
I completely agree. Look, it's a fair observation. Look at me. I'm
Yeah.
covered in tattoos.
Right.
I usually got a Metallica shirt on. I don't normally ever fit in, and I'm here doing
Yeah.
a Bitcoin show. Like, I get it. I
Yeah.
think you're essentially right. Okay, so let's start with the good stuff. So obviously you said you were dismissive at first of cryptocurrencies. Now you're a little bit more accepting. I'd rather stick
Yeah.
more towards Bitcoin than the other.
Sure, yeah,
bullshit.
let's just talk about Bitcoin.
What is it about it that you like? What is it, and like,
Yeah.
and what is it you agree with Bitcoiners on?
So I think that the critics of Bitcoin definitely fail to appreciate what they do. I think the biggest sort of conceptual flaw that they have is they look at Bitcoin versus the traditional system of payments. And it's like, well, Bitcoin is clearly, or by many measures, clearly inferior. It's slower, it's more costly, it's much easier to get stolen or hacked, it's far more volatile. There's no real imminent prospect of it becoming less volatile anytime soon, despite the protestations of many Bitcoiners. It's incredibly volatile, and that does not seem to be going away anytime soon. So it's like you look at like the dollar, which has been very stable against any sort of like what you need to buy. Yes, I know there's a little inflation, but by and large, it's a very stable currency. It's cheap to use. I just went and bought a coffee. It was very incredibly simple. We didn't have to have some fancy software. I could have swiped my phone. I paid cash, but I could have swiped my phone. It would have been very easy. It would have been far more difficult to do using Bitcoin. And so, but there's a blind spot here, and this gets to some of the things we'll talk about a little bit relating to anonymity, is that if we're just comparing the sort of transaction sets that most people engage in with most of the time, it's extremely hard to make an argument that Bitcoin is a better money. What I think the critics don't really get is that there's a series of transactions out there for which Bitcoin is a superior money because the traditional payment options are not available. And so the first time I sort of had this revelation, I think I wrote a post at my old publication, Business Insider, when I used to be there, when I started talking about changing my mind. And I was thinking about like, okay, what if I had a lot of money in China and I wanted to get it out? What are the different ways to get money out of China? You can do it, but it's costly and it's complicated. So one popular way to do it is if you have a lot of money, you could take a trip to Macau and you could pay a junket operator a certain amount of Chinese yuan, and they'll take you on a trip to Macau, and they'll give you chips at the casinos in Macau, and you sit there and you play baccarat for several hours. And then when you're done, you have probably lost a lot of money playing baccarat, but it's it's one of the games where you don't lose too much if you know what you're doing. And then you cash out your chips, and then you get the Macau currency, and then you can convert the Macau currency into dollars. So you've paid the junket operator, you've spent the time and money to go to Macau, you've gambled, lost the house rake, and then you've converted your Chinese yuan into dollars through a series of 4 extremely costly and time-consuming steps. Another way you could get money out of China is buy gems and put them in your sock and hope that you could fly to Australia or somewhere else and then sell the gems, but then you could get caught. The price of gems are liquid. You don't really know what you're going to get for them. There's ways to do it, but it's costly. It's cumbersome. Or, and this is what I had the revelation, you could buy Bitcoin from someone in China, transfer the Bitcoin to a wallet from someone into someone who had access to the Western banking system, sell the Bitcoin. And that is massively more efficient than any of the previous steps that I just described.
It comes with its own trade-offs, right? So you have to
Yeah.
protect your private keys.
Oh,
and things.
there's
Those things-
definitely
there's
there are certain trade-offs.
yeah. So buying
question.
gems, it's an easy transaction, and you're just not going to lose your gems with this. It's slightly
Well,
different, but
you could get stopped at the airport.
No,
And
of
they're like, well,
course.
what do you take off your shoes? And then all your gems fall out of your shoes.
But for some people, like for example, if this was my father, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put him in China with those three options. He's not going to do the Bitcoin one. It's just
No.
far beyond his ability.
And that's why it's like, even still, despite the theoretical capabilities.
But what I'm saying is there's trade-offs, and this is a good third option.
Yes.
And so one of the things that then suddenly becomes very important with Bitcoin is global liquidity.
Yes. Yes.
Because without
Yes.
liquidity,
that becomes impossible.
yeah, it becomes
Right.
impossible. Therefore, that's probably one of the most important things going for Bitcoin versus every other cryptocurrency right now.
Yes, and this is what got me in trouble with a bunch of Bitcoiners the other day, is because obviously there's a lot of, everyone who has Bitcoin would probably, and wants to make a lot of money, would love there to be a Bitcoin ETF, because that would be an extremely easy way for people who just want to speculate on the price of Bitcoin to just go in their normal brokerage account, buy some of the Bitcoin ETF, and it's not implausible that that would send the price higher. But if we think of those transaction sets as some combination, it's not buying coffee. We all agree with that, right? Even Bitcoiners will say it's not for buying coffee. But it's like some range of things, either, and some of them are outright criminal. Some of them, and we can all agree that they're immoral. Some of them are criminal, but,
Which depends which ones.
well, okay, so like, for example, what prompted it was there was
Yes, yeah,
there was
that-
a
but
bust.
I know that.
There was a bust of a child pornography ring.
Yeah.
There was no one who will defend that. It's criminal, and it should be criminal, and virtually no one would say that this is government overreach, right? Mm-hmm.
I'm with you on that one.
Yes.
Sorry.
But then there is another class of transactions, which say like buying marijuana, in
Yes.
which case it is also criminal, but there is a significant number of people who make a very good argument that this is outrageous that the government bans this, and
Yes.
this is immoral, and it's not immoral to flout the law.
Well, so-
it's illegal, but not immoral.
So there's another interesting one that I'm toying with at the moment now, which is state level censorship resistant trading. In
Yeah.
that Bitcoin can be used to get around sanctions, right?
Well, so this goes, yeah.
And at that point, I'm like, is this immoral? Like, are these sanctions right because America says they're right?
Right.
Who knows? Like, should Iran be sanctioned at the moment? I don't know. When you get to the depths of it, it's like, well, America has nuclear weapons, Russia has nuclear weapons, China, Britain,
Right.
Israel. Iran wants to develop, so they have sanctions. What? Just because they once said they want to blow Israel off the face of the map or something? Because my point being is like, is that immoral? And I get.
I mean,
really
I'm going to. I'll leave this to other people about
Okay.
the morality of sanctions. I'll just say that in the end, though, there is this spectrum of transactions.
Yeah.
Some of which are illegal and blatantly immoral. Some of them are illegal and gray area immoral. Some things are illegal and shouldn't be illegal, and I don't think that. And I think a lot of people would say there's nothing immoral about these transactions; they're merely illegal. Some transactions, going back to Chinese capital controls, are somewhere in the middle, and then some things aren't even illegal; they're just considered to be odious. And so, for example, payment companies deciding several years ago they weren't going to work with WikiLeaks.
yes.
So they got cut off from the banking system or the traditional payment system, not because of the law specifically, although of course they angered people of the law, but the payment systems didn't want to work with them. And you see other groups like this too. So for example, one of the defenses of Bitcoin is that, say, like online sex workers can accept payment in Bitcoin because the traditional online payment companies, like, we just don't want to work with them. And that could be an example of something that's not illegal at all.
Yeah.
Just some people find it odious, or some people find it uncomfortable to deal with. And so there's this transaction set available, and I just find the far end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum. And for all those things, a payment in Bitcoin may be a superior form of money than the alternative, which is not cash, because you can't use cash for those things, and it's not Venmo, Visa, or MasterCard, or PayPal, because those are unavailable. It's those other options. And so I think going back to what the mainstream critics get wrong is not seeing that it's like this sort of like second best alternative in many situations.
Next up, I talked to Joe more about the hypocrisy in Bitcoin. But before that, I've got a message from my amazing sponsors. And you know I'm going to talk about first. It is the mighty, mighty Kraken. And they had a massive announcement last week. I've been talking about them all year. All the amazing things they have for you traders and the amazing security they have. And by the way, if you never listened to my show with Nick Pokoko, their Chief Security Officer, you missed a gem. Go back and check that out. But Kraken just announced the launch of their mobile app, Kraken Pro, which allows you to trade Bitcoin on the go. So whether you're at home on the couch, if you're in Starbucks, you sat on a bus, it doesn't matter. You can now start trading Bitcoin on the go with Kraken Pro. There is so much packed into this app. They've got real-time price updates, multiple charting and order book displays, advanced trading features. You can view your complete history of orders, trades, positions, deposits, and withdrawals. And finally, the app comes with a deep and liquid set of 100 cryptocurrency markets, fees as low as 0%, and 24/7, 365 global support. The design is amazing, the UX is amazing, the app is fucking amazing. It's available for the iPhone and Android. Just search for Kraken Pro, which is KrakenPro. And lastly, but by no means least, we have the most innovative company integrated Bitcoin with financial services. You know what I'm talking about. It's BlockFi. And I just got my update from my interest account. Love it. Love the fact that I'm earning interest every month with my BlockFi interest account. And they've done so much to improve this. They've dropped all minimum deposits. Interest account holders no longer have to meet a minimum deposit amount with their Bitcoin, Ether, or GUSD balances to start earning interest. They have removed the early withdrawal penalty from the account and now offering one free withdrawal per month for all clients. Add to this the recent announcement of BlockFi Flex, where you can choose to receive your interest payments in the currency of your choice. So with a BlockFi interest account, you can now earn interest every month on Bitcoin, ETH, and GUSD. You've got to do your own research, but if you're interested in checking it out, head over to blockfi.com, which is BLOCKFI.com. So, can we get into the crux of the problem with the ETF, though?
Yes.
Yeah. So, what was your main gripe with it?
So I don't have any gripe with anything. I'm just asking questions. I'm just a journalist.
Yeah, you're just a journalist.
People can do whatever they want. But this is my issue, right?
Your journalistic...
This is my issue, which is that if we start from the premise that we just talked about, which is that Bitcoin is a transactional money, is more or less for the transactions that either the state or maybe big government doesn't want people to do. We accept that premise. B, as you yourself stated, these transactions only work if there's liquidity, right? You and I could trade Bitcoins all day long, but if there's no actual money in it, if there's no one actually willing to pay fiat dollars for them at the end of the day, then we're just like, we could be trading napkins with each other. It's just what it is. Like that doesn't, it's, the napkins aren't going to cover your bills to fly to New York. Like at some level, you need to live in this society. If you're going to accept a Bitcoin payment, at some level, you're going to need to have some confidence that there is someone willing to pay fiat dollars for them at the end. Okay. Or for some fiat currency. So we start from the premise that largely Bitcoin transactions are for the things that makes the state uncomfortable, some for good reason, some for bad reason. Liquidity needs to exist. An ETF would be an incredible liquidity on-ramp for speculative money, the likes of which we haven't seen. If a regulatory body approves an ETF, then you are in this inherent paradox in which one arm of the government has just approved a massive liquidity on-ramp that will inevitably enable the transactions that another arm of the government doesn't want to see. This is a fact. And we've just laid it out here why this is so. And so I'm not saying there should be a Bitcoin ETF or there shouldn't be. But there is a clear contradiction because every government is going to have laws. Every government is going to have some things that they want to allow and some don't. And so the existence of this new robust liquidity on-ramp would essentially be making it easier to do the transactions that another arm of the government doesn't want people to do. And I just think that regulators should think these things through.
Do you think Bitcoiners want an ETF to happen for any other reason other than for their Bitcoin to be worth more money?
No.
Exactly. It's not very cypherpunk.
Yeah.
You know.
No, it's not. It's not at all.
Yeah, I mean, I used to care, but now I don't. I just don't care.
Yeah.
I'm much more interested in
Yeah.
other issues. Okay, fair enough. I think that's fair enough.
But I do think I'll make one modest defense. Scaling Bitcoin is very important.
Mm-hmm.
The most important aspect of scaling is higher price. And I think that actually this gets lost in a lot of the debates. So that people are like, oh, should we change the block size? Should we have layer 2 solutions? Whatever it is. None of those are as actually important as the price going up. And the price going up theoretically reduces volatility, but also price going up allows a transaction to be made without dramatically increasing the price. So for example, if you imagine, let's go back to the old days, and the total value of all Bitcoin was $100,000. What if you wanted to make $1 million transaction?
Yes,
you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Today, I don't know what Bitcoin was, 70 billion or something like that. If you want to make $1 million transaction, it's relatively simple.
Yeah.
So I will grant, you could make the argument that it's not pure greed that Bitcoiners would like to see more robust fiat on-ramps, because I do believe that the Bitcoin transactional economy works better at higher prices of the currency.
Yeah, okay, so you've rationalized it, which is great. And obviously,
I would give that. I would give that would be one rationalization.
Okay. All right. So a bigger issue that kicked off
Yeah.
last week was with regard to anonymity.
Yes.
That was a very interesting area.
Right.
What triggered it for you? Because I tell you what, it read like to me, and it was very different because I'm used to following your tweets and listening to you. You were you felt a bit pissed off with this one. This kind of really got to you. You were very spiky in your tweets, and it was unusual for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was actually after the news that
Yeah.
this online child pornography ring had been busted and that there was Bitcoin involved, or that was the payment. And someone said something like, oh, it's good that they used Bitcoin because this is how they were able to track them. So this was someone said it's good that it was a Bitcoin advocate said that this is a good thing about Bitcoin is that regulators were able to crack down on them. And I have to say I found that to be disingenuous. I mean, it's really good that authorities were able to bust these people. But I think that there is a certain amount of dishonesty in when people say it's like, oh, no one ever said that Bitcoin is anonymous because everyone knows it's a public ledger and everyone can see every transaction. The problem I have with that is that you do get into this situation in which if you apply that too far extreme, then suddenly the transaction set that makes sense no longer makes sense. So for example, if there's not some level of maybe there's never going to be pure anonymity, but if there's not some level of ability to transact on the network without it being easy to discover who you are, then all the things that we just described become more or less impossible. And so, if you're in China and you want to move money out of the system, but in the end, it's not, if it were to be that it's not that hard to figure out who did the transaction, then, you could say, oh, well, I sent the money to someone else. But then if the authorities come to your house and arrest you, was it really a censorship-free transaction? Not really. Maybe you were able to transfer the Bitcoin to someone else.
Yeah.
But if you can be discovered ex post facto and sent to jail, then you haven't really gotten anywhere.
I think it depends on the country as well. Right?
Yeah, and of course, there's all kinds of context dependent, and it depends on how seriously authorities want to crack down and how aggressive they want to be. But the point stands that bragging about the openness of the network kind of undermines many of the attributes that in other contexts people are very proud of.
But so it depends who that individual was as well, because I personally wouldn't brag about the openness of the network. I think the only good thing about the open ledger is the fact that we can verify the 21 million coins.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we need. Other people have talked about where you can hold companies accountable and you can see their balances and such, and maybe with exchanges we want to have proof of it. I don't buy all that personally. I think it's about the 21 million coins.
Yeah.
And the only reason we don't have on-chain privacy is because we don't want to have an unknown inflation bug. That's the which potentially happened with Zcash and may happen with Monero. I think that's the only good thing about it. And I think you can achieve, certain levels of privacy.
Right.
I just think it's technically beyond a lot of people as well.
Well, look, I think that with all, and one thing that's definitely true is that the debate about the sort of the goodness of anonymity or the goodness of secrecy long precedes Bitcoin, and they'll say like this is like cryptography itself. As soon as the technology existed that allowed anyone to say send encrypted messaging, now we know that it's like a cornerstone of how the internet works. There's always been this trade-off. I think that Bitcoiners should be more honest about the trade-offs in terms of it can allow people to do good things and allow people can do bad things. And if there were a Bitcoin that existed that didn't allow people to do bad things, then there wouldn't be a Bitcoin that allowed people to do good things. And that they kind of go with each other. And people should be sort of honest that like this is an ethical quagmire.
Yeah, and
that if it's going to work for the freedom to transact with someone in a sanctioned country, you don't believe in the sanctions, or you don't believe that you should be prevented from donating money to WikiLeaks, those can all be like legitimate righteous stances. But then understand that same technology and that same system that allowed you to do that is going to allow someone to do something that you might find extremely odious.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that point. Do you want the government to stop you doing things because some other bad person might? So for example, in the UK at the moment, they're looking at censorship of adult content online because they're worried about children accessing it. I don't support that. I originally thought, well, that's a great idea. I don't want my son stumbling across some of the most brutal, hardcore pornography that you can find. But then I was like, well, no, that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
And so I think that people are always going to do bad things. I don't want, personally, the government telling me what I can do just because other people are bad.
Right.
Because, even if you look at the Bank Secrecy Act, I've talked to Caitlin Long about it, I don't have the stats, but the volume of transactions and money that is used for terrorism and crime, it was something ridiculous, like 0.002%. I don't know what it was. Whatever it was so low. But because of that, we're all encumbered with these laws. I don't know if it's chicken or egg, right? I don't know if because the laws exist that it stops people, or are they just low? I don't know, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I want a little bit less government.
And I get that. Like that, there is. I think that's exactly right. Like there is an embedded politics of Bitcoin. There's no question. There is an embedded rebellion. And this is what I said. I said it's not even against government per se. I mean, a lot of it's just against like large businesses and the choices that large businesses or large banks are going to make about what kind of clients they have. This is embedded. But this is why I find like the ETF question so interesting, because I think Bitcoiners want it both ways, because they want like the rebellion. They want the embedded politics. They want this like, no, I want to make the decision to transact with whomever I want to transact with. Even if the government doesn't want me to. But I want this other arm of the government to create this new institutional, this new investment vehicle that'll pump up the price of it.
Yeah.
And so all I was trying to point out is like, I believe this is a real contradiction.
Yeah, I think you're right. But you do run into that with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I've run into it all the time because I'm like you, I poke the fire.
Yeah.
I ask questions. I think a lot of times that I think you're right about Bitcoiners not always being honest about it, but I also think they contradict themselves. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. So as an outside observer, where do you think Bitcoin is right now, like in terms of its progress?
Yeah.
Do you feel it has a regulatory threat?
Not yet. So it's interesting. One of the things I find funny is that, Bitcoiners are like super into just these like mantras that they just repeat all the time. It's like Bitcoin fixes this or whatever it is. Yeah. And the Bitcoin Twitter especially can get incredibly repetitive, and it frequently could go for a long time without anyone saying anything new. Yeah. And I think there's actually a positive reason for that, which is that to some extent, I believe that Bitcoin was more or less a finished product on day one. Now, there were a few technical things that didn't quite work and some like sort of security aspects that need to be changed. But on some level, like if Lightning never existed, if there were never a layer 2 solution, whatever it is, the core sort of reason for its existence as this sort of like censorship-free money was more or less a complete project. And I think this is really different than, say, the other coins, whereas if you look at, say, a coin like Ethereum or something, there's a clear difference, which is that Ethereum aspires to be something. It's not there yet. it may one day theoretically, I don't know, I'm kind of skeptical
Yeah.
of like getting to be like this sort of like world computer, all this like decentralized apps, whatever the meme of the day is, decentralized finance. Like, it's not, it may get there. It certainly is not there. It doesn't work right now as promised. Whereas I think you could make a very good argument that Bitcoin more or less worked as promised almost from the very beginning. There are some further enhancements, as I say, layer 2 technologies, other things that can be layered into it in terms of maybe enhanced privacy, whatever it is. People talk about multi-sig stuff, security that's above my head. I get, and I understand people have more things, but none of that was required to make it work. But on the other hand, the flip side is, I think that Bitcoiners severely overestimate the current robustness of the network and think that, oh, we've already like sort of achieved this escape velocity where government couldn't stop it if they tried. I actually think governments have been shockingly permissive of it, and that if they wanted to seriously hamper it, they could probably kill it, and I don't think it would be that hard. For example,
Okay.
what if the government said, what if the Fed came out and said, in the US, banks aren't allowed to transfer money to Bitcoin exchanges? What would happen to the price? It would get destroyed. We all know that. It would get absolutely obliterated if a few different governments said that. If it was like, U.S., the U.K., a few major ones in Europe, it said banks are no longer allowed to do business with Bitcoin exchanges. We all know the price would absolutely crater. Mining capacity would collapse. Someone in the government could then buy up all the miners, rewrite the chain, screw it up. That would be the end of the project.
Why do you think that hasn't happened, though?
I think it hadn't happened because my honest belief is there is an ignorance, there is this fear and this pretty good storytelling about, well, we don't want to stifle innovation, and blockchain is the future, and we want to have a sort of like permissive, we want to like have an open mind, and then we'll come up with like a regulatory framework. And so far, it's not like Bitcoin has proven to be a major threat or anything. It's small, it's tiny. I know people think it's still very tiny, which is kind of a bullish thing in a sense. It could get a lot bigger. But it's tiny, it hasn't been used for that much bad stuff. And it's actually a number of criminal busts have been made because of it.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone has really, there's always so many people worrying, at the Federal Reserve, they have other things to worry about, like banks that are 1,000 times bigger than Bitcoin and making sure they're stable. But I do think there is some naivete. Like if they were, it's like, all right, how could we kill it? This idea that it can't be killed, that's nonsense. I actually think it could be killed and that it would not be particularly hard at this point. It's just that no one is really sort of thinking that it's like a real threat yet.
Yeah, I actually think it would be quite an interesting scenario to see it play out, because I don't think it would kill it. I mean, I think it would highly damage it.
Yeah,
but it's still going to exist in some countries.
I agree with that.
And it will go underground.
Yeah,
there will still be people mining it in America secretly.
No, you could like
secretly transact it, and it'd be kind of cool as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you could sort of imagine a world in which people meet on the street corner and pass someone an open dime or their ledger or whatever it is and hand it off that way. It would be very, sort of Neil Stephenson cyberpunk world in which that was sort of and maybe that's the future of it.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I also think there's a lot of stupidity in the government, but also there's some. I've noticed. I always follow the U.S. government. When Mark Zuckerberg was in Congress, and when David Marcus was in Congress, I actually believe there are some people in the government who actually they actually kind of can, because not everyone's power hungry, right? I think some people actually say, "Hey, this could make a better world."
Yeah.
And I don't believe every politician is like, "I want power. I want to destroy everyone." So I agree.
I agree. It's a mix, and I think there's always got to be like some mix out there of rules and freedoms, and that a government that tries to regulate every transaction is going to fail. At the government, there's never really been a government, I guess, that had a completely permissive attitude towards everything. But there's always just sort of going to be this inherent tension. That's like the sort of like push-pull of a democratic government.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, look, another thing I want to cover with you, because while you're here, it's useful to have your perspective. the world's very fucking weird at the moment. Lots of very weird things
Yes.
happening in the financial markets.
Yeah.
I'm not a financial analyst, but I look at something like negative yields.
Yeah.
Where I keep reading about
Yeah, yeah.
negative interest rates. I'm like, that can't be good.
It's weird. It's not good.
Yeah, and I look at what's happening in the repo market. Somebody explained it to me, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem good. So everything seems to be getting very
Yeah.
weird now. It feels to me as like a casual observer
Yeah.
that I would say pretty much America, Europe, and China are fighting as hard as they can to fight off a recession.
Yeah.
But it feels like an inevitability, and because they're fighting so hard to fight it off, when it does happen, it's going to be like it feels like it's going to be a really deep recession.
So here's my sort of take on what's going on right now. I'm not worried about another financial crisis per se,
Okay.
but
Because
financial crises largely originate out of private sector debt typically. Because unlike governments, private sector can't create its own money, and so you can get into a situation in which entities just run out of money. It's much harder for a government to just straight up run out of money. Leaving that aside, that's usually the sort of like
because they can print more.
yeah, because they create it, it's theirs.
We've gone back to why we like Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. But typically a financial crisis will originate because the banks, whatever, they just like run out of money and someone knows money, and then the value of that loan that they held on their books that they thought was going to get paid back doesn't, and then the person they owe money to starts freaking out, and then you get this panic and there's a run and so forth. I think what we're seeing right now, and negative rates are part of it, some of the stress that we're seeing in the repo market is part of it, is not about this imminent crisis per se. It's about the fact that government policies, and we could debate, and I have my opinions, and other people have their opinions about why this is so, but government policies post-crisis have done a poor job of generating robust, sustainable growth. And some people would take a more libertarian, free market reason, regulation, whatever. I would take a more sort of like standard Keynesian view of it's crazy how Germany, one of the richest countries in the world, like doesn't, is so focused on balanced budgets and so forth. But I don't care to like have that debate. That's my view. But in the absence of robust growth, people reach for the safest, most stable assets that there are in the world. And those tend to be government bonds. And so if everyone's driving up government bonds, then eventually you could have the yields go to zero. And one of the most stable assets in the world are reserves held at the Federal Reserve. And if everyone wants to hold money at the Federal Reserve, then you could have a shortage of those reserves because the Federal Reserve currently caps the size of how much money can be held there.
Okay.
And then you could have such like the repo crisis in which all these people want to hold safe assets at the Federal Reserve. There's only so much available, and then the price of them surges. The price of accessing them surges as it briefly did, and so the Fed was forced to expand supply. So my view is not that we're per se headed to sort of some crisis, more that central banks and fiscal authorities around the world have truly done a terrible job of instituting policies post-crisis that have created robust growth, and with robust growth comes assets that throw off yield and pay good cash flow or good dividends and so forth, and we see a shortage of those assets. We see a bid to an extreme high level of bid to the assets that exist that do pay off some yield and do have some modicum of safety, and hence the yield goes down even further. That is sort of the story I would tell. So it's not crisis, but it's not all things good either.
Right, okay. So you're critical, therefore, of central banks.
Yeah, well, what I would say is that, here's what I'm critical of. I'm critical of a macroeconomic regime that leans entirely on central banks cutting rates to generate growth. And I do think that has been a project that could go back for a long time. There's this new book that's out. I've only read a little bit of it, mostly excerpts from this Benjamin Applebaum at the New York Times that sort of talks about the emergence of this system in the early 80s, in which the goal was like, let's handcuff politicians, and because we can't trust politicians because for whatever reason, and let's just have the project of economic management be solely held at the central banks. And that has led us to this situation in which the only game in town, the only force that can try to stimulate the economy when growth is bad is the central bank by cutting rates lower and lower and lower until they hit zero or go negative. And it's a bad system, not because central banks are bad, not because cutting rates are per se bad, but because it shouldn't be the only tool in the toolbox.
Right.
And the upshot of having that be the only tool in the toolbox is mediocre growth, asset bubbles, and all kinds of other things that people don't like.
What other tools should there be, though? Like, what is missing?
The big one I would say would be direct government spending, direct government investment into the economy. And this is where I know, like, the Austrians they would also hate that, but nonetheless, this is my view, which is that there is tremendous more scope on the part of wealthy, developed market governments, U.S., U.K., Germany, to actually invest in the public.
Is that like, are you on about like public infrastructure projects?
Yeah,
like
public infrastructure project, public health, all kinds of things like that, absolutely. Hospitals, whatever it is.
That stimulates the economy because it creates jobs, and then
It does.
people
It
are
does.
in and-
It does a few things. It directly puts money in people's pockets.
Yeah.
It creates jobs. It can, if done right, and I believe it can be productivity enhancing, because a road isn't just the jobs that are created by the people working on the road, but theoretically by the towns that are connected, and then they can trade with each other more easily.
Mm-hmm.
A hospital isn't just the jobs, but also the improved health of the people in the area where the hospital is. Whatever it is, if you look at Germany, it's a well-known, many people have argued that they've let their infrastructure degrade over time to the point where it's surprisingly, for a rich country, actually becoming subpar, and for a country that prizes itself on its Autobahn. There are opportunities to both put people to work, put money in people's pockets, and increase or enhance the productivity of the nation by a better infrastructure. And I believe that all of this should be part of the sort of macroeconomic toolkit that governments have. And largely, look, governments spend money. I'm not naive. It's not like they're not. But when you look at interest rates that are like essentially zero, what the market is essentially telling them is their capacity to spend is far beyond what they're making the choice to. Politics has gotten in the way. There's been this call to balanced budgets or this call to deficit reduction. Let's just do it. Let's let the central bank do it just by stimulating lending. And lending is important. I mean, lending and credit are the lifeblood of the economy. But if you only do it by the credit side, if your only tool for improving the economy is to increase the amount of debt out there or to increase the ease with which one can acquire debt, then you end up in this situation in which you have a buildup of private sector debt that increases private sector precarity, and it also leads to asset bubbles.
Okay. Some of that government spending has to be careful, right? Because
Sure.
I'm assuming it's better for the government to be spending money on investing in private infrastructure products rather than the expansion of government.
Well, I would agree. I mean, governments can certainly spend their money badly.
What, Venezuela?
Yeah, but it's like, look, here's the thing. So people will say, look at Venezuela, they say, well, this is what happens when the government does X. It's like, no, Venezuela is an example of when you have a murderous dictator thug run the government. So it's like, that's the problem with Venezuela. It's not that they exceeded their balanced budget targets by 2%. And so I think people, there's no shades of gray. And so they say, oh, well, Venezuela printed all this money. It's like, no, the problem, if you look at the really backwards countries, or if you look at the countries that have hyperinflation, and anywhere they are, there's some consistent themes. They get into wars. They're corrupt on a scale that's unimaginable. They usually have dictatorial systems. It's not because their central bank intervened in the repo market. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You look at the countries in which they've just obliterated the currency. It's not because they did QE. It's because the governments there have destroyed any semblance of trust in the system and therefore the money which comes down from the system.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Listen, there's one thing final I want to touch on
Okay.
with you, because I think I'll be really interested to hear your point on this, because people are very mixed on this. Libra.
So I tweeted the day they announced it. I was like, I wonder if this is ever even going to launch. I was kind of skeptical.
I actually think Zuckerberg did a really good job this week. I think for
all
some of the fucking stupid questions they were fielding him.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
This is my thing of what Libra could be. I think the analogy that I've come up with, I don't really think it's even worth thinking of it as a cryptocurrency, because it's not really. I think it could have the potential to be the Android of money. And by that I mean like, look, there's all these payment systems around the world, right? So in China, they use WeChat or Alipay. In Europe, there's different payment systems. Here we have PayPal and Venmo and Square, and none of them really talk to each other. And if I'm on Venmo and you're on WeChat, I can't send you money and vice versa, and that's kind of problematic. You could imagine a situation in which there is essentially a global operating system that anyone could build a wallet for, and they're providing the rails. They're providing the underlying sort of like fiat backing of the system. But if anyone could build a wallet for it, then it sort of becomes this like global interoperable payment operating system upon which anyone could build. And I think that the closest analogy would be something like Android, which was a Google thing, but anyone could like build an Android device. You could build an Android tablet, you could build an Android phone, you could build Android into a TV, whatever it is. And so it sort of becomes like this like open source layer for all these things. I doubt it's going to happen because I think that the regulatory challenge of like proving to all these countries that they're like going to safeguard the underlying fiat money that one Libra is supposed to represent, I think it's just too much. It's too complicated. All it would take is a few regulators in a few important countries to say, no, we're not going to let the banks hold your money. It's probably, but on some level, a project like that has some logic to it. And then I just think like Facebook is just the worst company to do it because of how much anxiety there already is about how much they know about us. And there is no ring fencing Libra as much as they want. They could like, set up a foundation in Switzerland or whatever. But I think at some level, there is just no way we're ever going. It could truly separate itself.
Is there any company you think could do it? Like
No.
Apple? I mean, I trust Apple
Yeah,
certainly more than Facebook.
not really. It probably can't be done, but not because of the company per se, but just because I just can't see enough regulators around the world getting comfortable with anyone doing that.
What'll be interesting though is to see how much Alipay WeChat expands, because I had it on a flight from Finnair flight from Hong Kong to Finland for purchasing the Wi-Fi. 3 options were card, PayPal, and Alipay.
Yeah,
and I was like,
Alipay is
whoa.
in U.S. taxis now. You can pay, so that's a surprise. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and politically, it feels like, when we're living in this era of considering what's going on in China, considering Chinese censorship, considering the Belt and Road, considering the expansion of like Chinese surveillance, that there is this essentially Chinese payment rail,
Yeah,
which is essentially what Libra wants to be as well.
yeah,
Similar.
no, similar.
Yeah, so that's been allowed to come into the US, but not allowing a US company to have a competitor. That's what I find really odd.
It's a fascinating space.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
All right, well, listen, this was great.
Peter, I really appreciate you having me on. It's really
Anytime,
enjoyable.
man.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you for having me on when you did.
Thanks.
Listen, tell people how to follow your
I will.
work.
Yeah, check me out. My easiest way is my Twitter handle, @thestalwart, and send me a DM, say hi from there, and catch my show on Bloomberg or whatever else. And say hi. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. All the
All right,
best.
take care.
Alrighty, so what did you think of that? Did you enjoy that chat with Joe? I did. I really like the guy, actually. Followed him for a while. I like the way he will challenge people. I think his approach is interesting, and I love that he doesn't mind getting stuck into challenging people's opinions, something which I do, which I know pisses people off, but fuck it. So no individual thought can kill Bitcoin. If it can, then we're pretty screwed anyway, but I do think sometimes we need to discuss these important issues, and you know what? If you've discussed them before and you're fed up of it, move on, let somebody else do it. Some of us do not know the answer to some questions or have not had things discussed before. And I think his ideas on the ETF, I think they're pretty spot on. I'm sure most people care because they see it as a way to make the price go up. But is it very cypherpunk? Is it cypherpunk to have a Bitcoin ETF? Is it cypherpunk to seek approval for the government for this? I've been sucked into it. I have some Bitcoin. I want my Bitcoin price to go up. But at what cost? Is it a sellout? I really enjoyed talking to Joe about it. I would love the feedback from you on it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show. As ever, if you've got any questions, you can get in touch. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. As ever, massive thanks to everyone who supports the show. It's coming up to 2 years now, which is flipping amazing. I like every guest, every sponsor, everyone who shared the show, listened to it. We're approaching 3 million downloads. So much fucking stuff has happened in this last 2 years. It's crazy. I can't believe I'm getting to do this. I'm so ridiculously grateful to everyone who supported the show. But if you do want to support the show, if you're a regular listener and you want to help out, Even leaving me a review on iTunes helps. But everything you can do is listed up on my website. Just head over to whatbitcoindid.com, click on the support section. It'll explain everything. As I said, I'm headed back out to the States on Wednesday. So many potential cities. I'm flying probably into New York, and I've got Boston, Ohio, Indianapolis, San Francisco, LA, Hawaii, Washington, and Texas all on my visit list. I don't know if I'll get to do them all, but I'm going to get to as many cities as possible, record as many shows as I can for What Bitcoin Did and Defiance. All right, listen, have a great weekend. Love you all. Take care. Bye-bye.